The metal of the filtration unit hissed as Ellen tightened the coupling, the wind cutting across the rooftop in short, bitter gusts. The Voskarian settlement below stirred in sluggish patterns, light creeping over its jagged towers and rust-colored walkways. Ellen had grown used to its rhythm, daily maintenance, protocol logs, and the distant drone of generators echoing off the alien stone. But today, the sound that reached him wasn't mechanical. It was silence, an unnatural kind of stillness. Hung in the air, broken only by the dull thud of boots against packed earth. Ellen straightened, squinting over the rooftop edge. Figures moved below two armored guards, flanking something smaller between them. The girl stumbled as they dragged her toward the central square. She looked impossibly young, barely a teenager. By human standards, her thin gray form cloaked in dust and bruises. Chains hung from her wrists, trailing like broken threads behind her, but she wasn't screaming. Not yet. "She is Telgen," said a voice behind him. Koval, Ellen's Voskarian assistant, stood clutching a wrench he hadn't used in 10 minutes. His four-fingered hands fidgeted nervously, eyes fixed downward. "You should not watch this, Ellen. It is not meant for humans. What is it?" Ellen asked, though his stomach was already tightening. Koval hesitated. "Justice." Her bloodline fought against the Dominar. She must bear witness. Witness what? The Voskarian didn't answer. His inner eyelids flickered a reflex. Ellen had come to recognize as discomfort. In the square, the girl was forced to her knees. A group of elders encircled her, their violet robes fluttering in the wind. Even from this distance, Ellen could see the distinct markings along her neck, violet, spirals unique to the Telgen clan. He remembered the briefings, the rebellion 3 cycles ago, and the Dominar's decree that followed. One youth from each Telgen family was to be chosen, not for execution. That would be simple. For display, the guards brought out the creature. Then massive scaled, a beast of muscle and breath that steamed in the cool air. It walked on 6 limbs and wore a ceremonial harness carved with ancient runes. A crash beast. Ellen had only seen drawings and orientation manuals. Its jaws alone could snap a grown man in half. And now they were chaining it to the girl. "No," Ellen whispered. "They're not going to." 10 days, Koval said flatly. "She is to be tethered, dragged wherever it goes. That is the sentence." A hush fell over the crowd. The final restraint clicked into place. The girl screamed, "It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be." The sound echoed like a razor in Ellen's chest, because it wasn't fear or panic, it was despair. As if she had been holding it in, waiting until the chains bit deep enough to make it real. Waiting until there was no more hope. Ellen didn't remember climbing down. He didn't remember walking back through the compound gates. The scream followed him. It lived in the sound of his boots on the floor. It vibrated in the pipes he worked on. The filtration systems whined for attention, but his mind was locked on the square, where a child's body trailed behind a monster for the satisfaction of power and tradition. The human outpost was silent that night. Too silent. No one spoke about it. No one asked questions. Ambassador Wexler's voice echoed from the day's diplomatic log. "We are guests. Their customs are not ours to judge. Non-interference is not a suggestion. It is your only option." But the scream had already taken root in Ellen's mind, curling into something slow and sharp. It had only been the first day. Asterisk. The third morning began with wind again, sharp and cold, whispering through the slats of the metal barracks. Ellen hadn't slept. He lay on his cot staring at the ceiling, the girl's scream still alive in his ears. It had been quieter last night. Not because the suffering had stopped. Because her voice was giving out. He rose before the shift alarm and walked past. Koval without a word. The Voskarian offered none either. Their work on the air quality monitors was silent, methodical, broken only by the hum of tools and the occasional hiss of decompression seals. But from outside, beyond the thick compound walls, came the faint clinking of a chain. Drag, pause, drag again. Ellen clenched his jaw and tried to recalibrate the regulator's intake valves. "You are troubled," Cavell said softly, not looking up. Ellen didn't answer. "It is not your fault," the alien added. "This is Dominar law. Even we do not choose." "She's a child," Ellen said finally. "She's not the one who chose either." Cavell looked at him, long and slow, then returned to the panel. "She is Telgen. That is enough." By the fourth day, the human compound began to adjust. The first few screams had turned heads. Then people closed their windows. By the second night, headphones became common. By the third, they were laughing again in the dining hall jokes, music, the clinking of utensils. But Ellen sat alone at the far table, untouched rations cooling beside him. He tried to file a transfer request. Cited stress. Cited focus issues. The reply came 3 hours later from Commander Jeff, who didn't even look up from his datapad when they crossed paths in the corridor. "We're short-staffed," Jeff said. "Just do your job." Outside, the beast dragged its prisoner through. The dust again. Her cries had changed, no longer sharp or pleading. Now they rasped like wind over dry leaves, hollow, distant, somehow worse than the sound of pain. It was the sound of someone being erased, breath by breath, hour by hour. Cavell avoided his gaze those next 2 days. He only spoke of wiring, coolant levels, tool calibration. They both pretended not to hear what bled through the vents at night. On the 7th morning, Ellen stood at the window of the maintenance bay. The square beyond looked the same, but he noticed something different. No one was watching anymore. The guards played some kind of game with polished stones. Workers passed by the girl as though she were a statue. Even the elders no longer stood. In a circle dot, it had become routine. "She will not last," Cavell said, appearing behind him. "The beast usually drags them until the spine breaks, or the lungs collapse." Ellen turned. "What's her name?" Cavell hesitated, then said, almost like a confession, "Nera." The sound of it felt like an accusation. It gave shape to the girl, turned her from punishment into person. "She has lasted longer than most," the Voskarian added, quieter now. That night, Ellen didn't close the blinds. He watched her from his quarters as the crash beast curled in. The square to sleep, its chains slack between paws. Nera was still awake, barely. Her body unmoving, but her eyes open, dim and distant. There was no more screaming. Just silence. 26 hours remained. He counted them. The diplomatic logs blinked. On his tablet, Ambassador Wexler's voice echoed calmly. "Contract negotiations proceeding favorably. All personnel are maintaining non-interference protocols." Ellen shut off the tablet. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. Instead, he reached under his bed and began laying out the tools one by one. Medkit, blanket, plasma cutter. EMP override. His hands moved before his mind could argue. "This is madness," he whispered. But somewhere outside, across dust and steel and silence, a girl named Nera was still alive. And that, Ellen realized, was reason enough. The moons of Voskar hung low and dim, half swallowed by shadow as the monthly eclipse began its slow crawl across the sky. Ellen stood at the edge of the human compound, his breath tight in his chest. The metal fence in front of him buzzed faintly with a low-voltage perimeter field meant to discourage wildlife, not determined technicians with clearance codes. He keyed the panel beside the maintenance hatch. It blinked once. Access granted. The panel slid open with a hiss, revealing a dark tunnel just wide enough for a man with a pack on his shoulders. He stepped inside. The emergency pack weighed less than it should have. Just enough supplies to keep someone alive for 2 days in. The field, but Ellen didn't plan for long survival. He only planned to reach her dot above. The compound dozed. Night shift was skeletal 2 guards at the gate, a communications officer asleep at her desk, and a security system Ellen had helped design himself. He knew its blind spots. He had mapped every motion sensor, every camera arc, every spot of darkness dot when he emerged from the tunnel beneath the east fence. He crouched low behind the stacked fusion cores and waited. The settlement beyond was quiet. Lanterns burned along the pathways, casting long shadows against rust-colored walls. The air smelled of dust and oil, tinged with something sweeter native night-bloom flowers that only opened under moonlight. A sharp contrast to the rot at the heart of the settlement dot in the square, the beast lay curled in sleep, its massive ribs rising and falling in slow rhythm. The chain linking it to Nera remained taut, coiled around a stake embedded deep in the ground. She was lying beside it, unmoving, her face turned toward the sky. Ellen's pulse beat louder than his footsteps. Voskarian guards stood at the far end of the square, speaking softly over a game of polished stones. Ellen had watched them for nights, knew their movements, their rhythm. They would change position in 12 minutes. He waited, crouched behind the edge of the ceremonial platform, heart hammering like a drum in his throat. Then he moved. The distance from platform to Nera was no more than 15 steps. It felt like 1,000. Every breath sounded too loud. Every pebble underfoot a cannon blast dot when he reached her. He dropped to his knees. Up close, her condition was worse than he imagined. Her gray skin was torn and bruised, caked with dust and dried blood. The violet markings on her neck were faded, barely visible beneath the swelling. Her lips were cracked, and her breathing shallow, a dry rasp. But her eyes opened barely. Amber, flickering, uncertain. "I'm going to help you," Ellen whispered, even though he didn't know if she understood. He pulled the small Amy device from his belt and held it against the locking clamp on her restraints. It clicked softly. The cuff sprang open. The chain went slack. The crash beast stirred. One massive paw shifted. A low grunt rumbled in its chest from across the square. A voice shouted. One of the guards had turned early. No more time. Ellen scooped Nera into his arms. She weighed nothing feather-light and terrifying. She whimpered, a broken sound, as her head slumped against his shoulder. The beast lunged, rising in a wave of muscle and teeth, but the chain held. Just barely. Shouts erupted behind him. Lights flared to life. "Hold on," Ellen muttered, cradling her tighter. He ran, across the square, through the narrow alleys between the sleeping buildings, his boots slapping against stone. Behind them, energy weapons cracked the air. Too slow, too late. He didn't run toward the human compound. He turned away from it, toward the eastern boundary, toward the wilderness. The guards would expect him to head for safety. But there was none for him now, not with what he had done. There would be no courtroom, no appeal. Just a voided ID, a revoked pass, a broadcast name. Traitor. The Voskarian highlands loomed ahead, jagged and dark under the eclipsed moons. The settlement lights faded behind them. No alarms now, just the sound of his breath and the faint, rattling breath of the girl in his arms. She clutched his shirt with fingers weak but desperate. When they passed the final perimeter, beacon, and stepped into the wild, Ellen finally stopped. His legs shook, chest heaving, every joint on fire. Behind him, sirens began to howl. Too late. Nera's head rested against his chest. He looked down at her, and something settled inside him. There would be no going back. But there had never really been a choice. He turned toward the hills and kept Walking. Asterisk dawn crept over the Voscarian. Highlands in slow, copper-colored waves, washing the alien terrain in light that felt too ancient to be warm. The jagged ridges behind them faded into haze. Before them, the ground fell into a shallow ravine lined with pale, spiraling plants. That shimmered faintly as the suns rose. It looked like a place forgotten by both war and civilization. Ellen stumbled into the ravine, boots dragging through the dust, muscles burning. His arms shook from exhaustion, but he didn't stop until he reached the shadow of an overhang where a small stream trickled across the rocks. Only then did he sink to his knees and gently lay Nera down on the thermal blanket he'd stuffed into his emergency pack. Her eyes fluttered open at the shift, pupils dilated and unfocused. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Ellen cooled off his canteen cap and held it to her lips. "Water," he whispered. Slowly, she stared at him, dazed and quiet, but drank. Her throat worked slowly with each swallow, as though relearning the motion. The water spilled a little down her chin, darkening the dust crusted against her neck. She blinked and looked at him, really looked. No scream, no fear, just confusion. "I'm Ellen," he said softly, unwrapping the medkit beside her. "You're safe now." He wasn't sure she understood, but something in her posture relaxed. He began cleaning her wounds, working gently, muttering apologies whenever she flinched. Her skin was laced with deep scrapes and raw burns where the chain had pulled. Her back was worst of all, torn open in places where the beast had dragged her over gravel and metal. His hands trembled as he applied antiseptic. She never cried. Out. She barely moved. He wrapped her wrists and ankles, her ribs, her shoulder. The bandages ran out before he reached her legs. "I'm sorry," he said again, not even knowing what part he was apologizing for anymore. She blinked up at him, then finally spoke, voice cracked and rasping. "Why human helps?" The question stopped him. She had said it in halting English. Her accent rough, the words strained but unmistakable. He sat back, shocked because it was wrong. That was the answer that came to him first. But it wasn't complete, because what they did to you, it wasn't justice, he said quietly. "Not by any law that matters." She looked at him a long time. "Wrong by human laws, not Voscarian." "Wrong by any laws," he said, firmer now. "By any measure that has a heart." She blinked slowly, her 4 eyelids moving like ripples. Then she said, softer this time, "You care?" "Yes." She didn't speak after that. But the silence between them felt different now. Not empty, just quiet. They rested for hours under the overhang. Ellen watched the ravine mouth, eyes sharp for any signs of patrols. He had deactivated his tracker, but it wouldn't be long before the Voscarian guards started a sweep. Humans, too. He had violated interstellar protocol. He'd broken non-interference, sabotaged a diplomatic mission, stolen a living person from an active punishment zone. There would be no leniency waiting back at the compound. No quiet reassignment. Only exile, or worse. But none of that mattered. When Nera finally stirred again, she pushed herself up, arms trembling under her weight. Ellen moved to help, but she waved him off weakly. Her legs buckled beneath her, but she didn't fall. Her amber eyes shone with something that hadn't been. There before determination. Must. "Move," she said. "Search parties come." "You're not strong enough," Ellen warned. "Have to be." She pointed toward the distant horizon, where a line of low hills jagged the sky. That way. Old places. Forgotten. Not under Dominar. Control. Ellen looked, then nodded. He packed their things quickly, what little they had, and helped her walk. She leaned heavily against him, every few steps punctuated with pain, but she never asked to stop, They walked until the sun began to dip behind the high peaks. The terrain grew stranger the further they went. Spiral-shaped rock formations jutted from the ground like alien bones. Some plants glowed faintly as the evening shadows crept in, pulsing with soft internal light. Ellen didn't know what was safe to touch, or even breathe, but Nera seemed to know. She avoided certain patches of moss, knew when to duck beneath overhangs when search vessels passed overhead. Twice they had to stop and press against the rock, holding their breath, waiting as Voskarian scouts buzzed overhead in silent HOVRCRAFT. As night returned, they found shelter in a small hollow beneath a ridge, shielded on three sides by stone. They shared a ration bar, dry and tasteless, but enough to keep them conscious. Nera spoke more now, slowly, carefully. "I was youngest," she said. "Family had no other. Father fought in rebellion. That's why they chose me." Ellen watched her. Was he? Her inner eyelids flickered again, pain or uncertainty. Taken to deep mines. Many never return. The silence that followed was long. The stars above glittered through the cracks in the ridge above. Alien constellations Ellen didn't recognize. Nera's voice came again, barely above a whisper. "Why risk for stranger? Humans need Dominar, need Voskar minerals." He looked into the darkness. Some things matter more than minerals. After a pause, she leaned slightly into him, her head resting against his shoulder. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't survival. It was trust. And that made it more powerful than anything Ellen had ever known. The abandoned temple emerged at dawn, rising from the highlands like a memory carved in stone. Its spiral towers were eroded by time and wind, yet still proud, still defiant. The structure loomed above the ridge in uneven geometry, elegant in ways Ellen couldn't describe. It was clearly ancient, yet somehow it had endured. He could feel it the moment they stepped into its shadow. This place mattered. "Telsian sacred place," Nera said quietly as they approached the grand archway. Her voice was stronger now, her steps steadier despite the pain. Before Dominar clan took power, 5 days had passed since their escape. Her recovery had been rapid, almost unnaturally so. Ellen suspected Telgian biology worked differently from human. Whatever the reason, she no longer needed him to carry her, though she still leaned close during the colder nights. The temple's great entrance was wide open. Dust and moss covered the stone, but the interior held surprising warmth. Murals lined the walls, layers of color and shapes that danced in the flickering light of their lantern. Some showed stars, some strange beasts. Others showed Telgians building cities, farming, teaching children beneath glowing skies. It didn't match what the human diplomatic corps had taught him. "Your people were artists," Ellen said, pausing to trace a line on the mural. "Scholars." Nera nodded slowly, her expression a strange mix of pride and grief. "Telgians built much, created, studied stars, but Dominar wanted control, not beauty. They chose a central chamber to rest, enclosed by crumbling stone pillars and a skylight above that filtered pale amber light. It was the first place since the grove where Ellen felt they could breathe. He unpacked the last of their supplies, while Nera showed him how to identify edible roots in the cracks of the floor and combine them into a simple stew. "My mother taught me this," she said, stirring the small pot. She was keeper of knowledge, told stories, recipes, songs. He watched her carefully. "Do you think you'll ever see her again?" Nera's hand paused. Her inner eyelids flickered again. "Perhaps, if rebellion lives." Ellen sat beside her as the mixture began to boil. The smell was earthy, unfamiliar, but not unpleasant. "There's still a rebellion?" he asked. She nodded. "Underground, quiet, waiting. Why do you think search parties stop far from here? They fear sacred places. They know rebels watch. After their meal, while Ellen checked what remained of the medical kit, Nera moved across the chamber and began clearing dust from an altar. She seemed different now. Stronger, yes, but something more. Her voice had gained weight, her gestures more purpose. In this place, she was not a victim. She was something older, deeper connected. Ellen finished organizing his kit and turned. She was standing in front of him, hands out, fingers lightly touching his face. He froze, uncertain. "It is gesture," she whispered. "Old Telgian custom. For gratitude." He nodded slightly. "You don't owe me anything." Her hands stayed on his cheeks. "That makes it stronger." And then she kissed him. It was soft at first, curious, her lips cooler than a human's, textured differently, with that subtle Telgian vibration he had felt when she rested against him. But the emotion behind it, longing, trust, something unspoken, was unmistakable. He kissed her back. When they parted, her amber eyes searched his. "The Dominar says humans have no soul," she said. "That you are machines of flesh, only take, only want." Ellen's mouth twitched into a tired smile. "And what do you think now?" "I think." She trailed her fingers along his jawline, slow and deliberate. "The Dominar knows nothing of human hearts." What followed was not desperation, not even passion. It was understanding two people who had seen the worst of the world choosing, for one night, to create something else. Their bodies learned each other with gentle wonder. No fear, no shame. Ellen marveled at the contrast of her skin against his. The difference in breath, the symmetry of hearts beating beside one another, despite being born on worlds that had never touched when they lay together under the arching ceiling of the temple. Nera curled close, her arm draped over him. For the first time since he arrived on Voskar, Ellen felt not like a visitor. He felt home. Outside, the alien stars wheeled in silence. Inside, something had begun. Not a rebellion. Not yet, but a reason for it. The old communication console crackled to life just after midday, its rusted frame sputtering out bursts of static and fragmented words in Voskarian dialect. Ellen sat up sharply, blinking sleep from his eyes. Nera stirred beside him, blinking in the dappled light that filtered through the temple's cracked ceiling. Her hand found his instinctively, the bond between them now, unspoken but sure. Ellen rose and crossed the chamber, dusting off the control panel. The power source was ancient, likely scavenged and repurposed by rebels long gone. But it worked barely. He adjusted the frequency dials, and the fragmented voices sharpened. Human, traitor, violated. Dominar orders, bounty posted. Ellen exhaled slowly, the weight of the message settling onto his shoulders. It wasn't a surprise. He had expected this. Earth's diplomatic corps had disavowed him, labeled him a rogue agent. The Voskarian Dominar had declared him a criminal, a symbol of defiance that must be punished. The price of compassion was exile. "They know," he said softly. Nera joined him at the console, her expression unreadable. "They will come," she replied, "but not here." "Why not?" "Because they fear what still remembers." She gestured around the temple. "The old places are not just history. They are guarded, protected." As if in answer, a chime echoed from the console, short, clipped, precise. A code. Nera's eyes widened. "They call us." An hour later, they were walking again. The path beyond the temple wound through jagged cliffs, past broken statues worn smooth by time. Ellen carried what little remained of their supplies. Nera led the way, her steps steady despite the lingering stiffness in her body. She moved like she knew where she belonged now. At sunset, they reached the edge of a valley veiled by shimmering air. Ellen blinked, confused, until he realized the distortion wasn't heat. It was a cloaking field. Old technology, forgotten by the Dominar, but still functional. Nera pressed her palm to a hidden panel in the rock. The shimmer rippled, then hardened. Beyond it lay a hidden settlement, nestled into the valley like a secret blooming in shadow. Ellen froze. It was unlike anything he'd seen on Voskar. Gardens climbed the walls of carved dwellings. Children laughed in narrow alleys. Murals covered the stone, glowing faintly in the dark. And everywhere, violet markings. Telgens. They had survived. A patrol approached 3 armed figures with markings like Nera's. They stopped upon seeing her, shock rippling through their ranks. "Nera," one whispered, "you're alive." The words were followed by shouts, calls, running feet. Dozens emerged from homes and halls, forming a loose circle around them. Ellen felt suddenly exposed, but Nera stood tall. A 4th figure stepped forward, older, dignified. His leg was stiff, scarred. His violet markings had faded with time, but his eyes burned with recognition. "Father," Nera breathed. The old warrior embraced her without hesitation. The crowd fell silent. Ellen turned away to give them space, but then the man stepped toward him, voice rich and low. "You are the human who broke the chain?" Ellen nodded. "Yes, sir. You have given me back my daughter, at great cost." Ellen didn't answer. He didn't need to. The man gestured, and the crowd parted. "Come, you are welcome." That night, the rebels held a feast in the stone plaza at the valley's heart. Fires crackled, music echoed on alien flutes, and the smell of fresh bread and spiced root filled the air. Nera laughed with children, her presence commanding yet gentle. Ellen watched her from the edge, marveling at how easily she stepped back into her place among her people. Later, as the celebration quieted, she sat beside him. They looked up at the stars. "Those constellations," she said, pointing. "Do they look like home?" Ellen smiled faintly. "Too far. Earth's not even a dot from here." She touched his hand. Council made offer. He turned. "What kind?" "They want you to stay. Help us, Dominar tech. You understand human diplomacy. You can be." Ellen looked at their joined hands. "And you? What would I be to you?" She leaned in, her forehead touching his. "To me, you are already everything." His heart beat hard in his chest. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Your father said my actions became a symbol," he murmured. "Maybe that's what both our worlds need. A symbol that says we're more than enemies, more than guests and rulers, that we can care." "Yes," she whispered. He kissed her, slow and sure, and she kissed him back. Later, they climbed to the highest point of the valley, the temple's signal tower, and activated the beacon. A column of golden light shot into the night sky, pulsing slowly. Across the planet, other beacons would answer. A warning. A promise. And deep in the minds, among the enslaved and forgotten, whispers would begin. The chain breaker lives. The rebellion breathes. Ellen stood with Nera, watching the stars shimmer above. 10 days he had watched her suffer. He would not spend another day apart. And from their shared pain, a revolution had begun. Asterisk the end. Asterisk asterisk.